Welcome back to our lives. I hope you're well. Before we start, I just want to thank my spiritual teachers, starting with His Holiness Resnick Goswami, the author of the Bhagavad Gita study guide that we're going through chronologically and systematically on these lives, as well as my spiritual grandfather, His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, the founder, Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. If you haven't read his Bhagavad Gita, I highly suggest you do. On this channel, we defend the worldview, the personalist worldview of Gaudiya Vaishnavism or Krishna consciousness or Bhakti Yoga. And we make reference, we refer to the famous text called the Bhagavad Gita, this most famous text of Vedic wisdom that all the traditions of Sanatana Dharma that base themselves on the Vedas, of which the Bhagavad Gita is the essence, try to appropriate and interpret in their own way. So we're on the topic of sacrifice, the theme of sacrifice. What does sacrifice mean in the Bhagavad Gita? And now we're finally getting, Hridayana Maharaj, who has a Ph.D. from Harvard, by the way, in Sanskrit, which he got faster than anyone in the history of the department. So, and that's just a material qualification. He's a spiritual leader with thousands and thousands of followers and disciples all over the world. A great modern day bhakti intellectual. So he's been developing with references to the text this theme of sacrifice. So let's read here, the bottom of the page 4, because now we're going to get to the real sacrifice, which means devotion to God. Devotion to God. Okay, so what is the status of the yagyas or sacrifice described above? They all incur karma, for they all unfold within nature's modes, yielding but quick but fleeting fruits. Thus, those who seek success in karma, not freedom from karma, offer to God. So here's a big distinction here between the monotheism as taught in the Bhagavad Gita and the polytheism, which is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, but not taught or not advised. In the quote-unquote Hindu world, you still see that in India a lot. A lot of people think that, there really isn't one supreme God up there. There's a bunch of gods and goddesses, and you just have to worship all of them kind of together in a salad bowl, kind of. That's why you go to a lot of Hindu temples, you'll see an altar for Ganesha, an altar for Durga, an altar for Vishnu, an altar for Krishna, an altar for this or that god. But the understanding, at least according to the Bhagavad Gita, is that there's one supreme God above all, and that's Krishna. But still, it's better than, nothing is better than, something is better than nothing. So Krishna, broad-minded and kind as he is, indirectly allows and accepts the offering of rituals and sacrifices offered to the gods and goddesses of this universe, who are really nothing but, according to the Gita, appointed ministers in the courts, in the king's court, the king being Krishna or Vishnu. So Hridayana Maharaj, or Dr. Resnick, continues here. Only by offering to God, like with a capital G, and not the gods, in full knowledge, can one be actually liberated? Can one actually be liberated? So in other words, if you're looking for freedom from this horrible cycle of birth and death into which you're stuck, offer your sacrifice and your love to Krishna. If you want to, have a better life in your next life, come back again in this material world and come back, richer or with a better wife, or more popularity, or more power, or better health, or better looks, or whatever, then yeah, worship such and such demigod. As a matter of fact, in the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the other text that we often quote on this channel, and which is another epistemological authority or source of epistemological authority for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas or for the Hare Krishna people, there's a whole slew of verses, I think, in the second canto, where the author says, look, if you want to have a lot of power, worship such and such demigod. If you want a good wife, worship Uma, the wife of Shiva. If you want good health, worship such and such god. If you want, political control, worship such and such god. If you want to impress others, worship such and such god. But at the end of those verses, and this is important to note, at the end of the verse, the conclusion is forget all that, just worship Krishna. Just worship Vishnu. So So let's continue here. Even if by worldly yagya one rises to this world's heaven, one will fall back again. One will fall back again. In other words, in this material world, nothing's eternal. So even if you perform this or that sacrifice to this or that demigod or god with a minuscule, with no caps lock on the word G, on the letter G, and you may take birth on a higher planetary system and have a body of a devata, as they're called, and enjoy great amounts of time and physical pleasures and so on. Ultimately, when that credit runs out, you have to come back to planet Earth. And here's a reference to verse 20 and 21 from chapter 9. Let's go here. In verse 20 to 21 of chapter 9, Krishna says, this is really interesting. He says, those with three sciences, so here's a little footnote. What are those three sciences? The Rig, Sama, and Yajurveda. So those with three sciences, Soma drinkers, cleansed of sin, honoring me with offerings, petition passage to heaven. Approaching Surendra's world of merit, they enjoy in heaven the heavenly pleasures of gods. So here Krishna is describing, look, you have this ritual, that ritual, you worship this or that god with a small g, and then, Surendra's world. Surendra, I think, is a name for, don't get me wrong, but maybe it's Indra. In other words, the world, the heavenly world. When heaven is mentioned here in this context, we're not talking about the kingdom of God. What Christians would call heaven. Christians, when they talk about heaven, generally talk about what we as followers of the Vedas call Vaikunta or Goloka Vrindavan, the kingdom of God, where you actually go as an eternal soul, shedding your physical body behind and living eternally in a wonderful eternal relationship with Krishna and other liberated souls ad infinitum, for eternity. Heaven in this context is not that. Okay? Heaven in the Vedic literatures refer to heavenly planets within the temporary material world. It's just like a better neighborhood of the material world where you go and you live for a long time. You have a great party there, but eventually you can't stay there forever. You have to die and reincarnate back on the middle planetary system where planet Earth is located and basically start from scratch. And that's why here in verse 20, Krishna says, having enjoyed the vast heavenly world and exhausted their merit. In other words, you ran out of credit. You ran out of your pious credit. So what happens then? They again enter the mortal world. Now, even the heavenly planets technically are mortal because you don't live there forever. You have to die. So, but Krishna, when he speaks about the mortal world, he's referring here to planet Earth. Planet Earth. And so Kshinya, that's why there's this, the actual Sanskrit is Kshinya Punya Martya Lokam Vishanti. You fall back down as a soul, back to planet Earth, and you get a human body again. Thus, having duly pursued Sri Veda Dharma, in other words, performing this sacrifice to this god and that sacrifice to that god, as prescribed in those three Vedas, the Rig, Yajur, and Sama Veda, which are taken so seriously by so many Brahmins and Hindus in India, but which for the Vaishnavas or the devotees of Krishna are just like, they, we respect them, but we have nothing to do with them because all we want is just bhakti, pure devotion to God, pure devotion to Krishna, beyond the material world, beyond these, heavenly, wonderful planets where you can enjoy for so long, but where you can't stay forever. So what happens to these people? Thus, having duly pursued Sri Veda Dharma and their wished for wishes, they achieve only coming and going. Only coming and going. In other words, you go to the spiritual world. You go to the heavenly planets. You enjoy there for some time. You come back to planet Earth. You do it again. But you're still so greedy and, pious, but greedy and selfish. And you just want to think about yourself. So you perform this sacrifice, this god, that goddess, and so on and so on and so on. You die. You get promoted up to some heavenly planet. Enjoy there for a long time, but then again, Kshinya Punya Martya Lokam Vichanti, you fall back down to the material world. So there is no permanent selfish happiness in the material world. It just doesn't exist unless you perform, a lot of work to have it. But you have it for for a short amount of time. It's like you work really hard to catch a wave when you're surfing. and you enjoy the wave for those 5, 6, 10 seconds. And then when that wave's done, you have to work really hard to go past the breaking point and wait for that other wave and so on. So similarly, in the material world, the only real permanent situation anywhere in the cosmos of the Lord, anywhere in the creation of the Lord, is devotion, pure devotion to Krishna. Otherwise, if you want to, be happy in the material world, you can only do this up and down program, from planet Earth to some heavenly planet, back to planet Earth, back up to the heavenly planets. That's the problem. That's the existential problem with material existence. So let's go back to Dr. Resnick here. Advanced spiritual yoga takes one beyond the best rewards of worldly offerings, of all of which are ultimately inappropriate and do not lead to God, for they do not aim at God, right? These offerings to these gods and goddesses ultimately are not aimed at the Supreme Lord and with a desire to love him and receive love from him. It's just business. That's why you could say, in a way, Hinduism is just business. I scratch this god's back and he'll give me my new car. I'll scratch that goddess's back and she'll give me a new husband, a good husband. It's mundane, it's materialistic, it's selfish, but that's reality. So here we go. They do not help us to see God. Conclusion: be careful to whom you make your offering. Be careful to whom you make your offering. Nevertheless, Krishna teaches that even a mundane yajna or sacrifice is better than no yajna at all. That's why you could say, people who are following the sort of Hindu Vedic system, polytheistic, and just doing business with the gods and goddesses, it's better than, your woke atheistic, fully, moral relativist bull shit of today. At least there's some approach towards divinity. At least there's some piety, and that's much better than hardcore materialism, where you don't even acknowledge where your, material pleasures come from. Even if one has no wish to serve God, one must at least pay cosmic taxes on all the natural resources we receive from God's agents. However, there are greater things available than good karma. There is actually spiritual life, a key to which is the spiritual sacrifice or spiritual yajna, which we will now consider. I love this phrase. There are greater things available than good karma. There are greater things available than good karma. That makes a great title for a YouTube channel, video. When we forget our source, Dr. Resnick continues, and thus our true own nature, we try to exploit this world. Illusion, or Maya, then covers our real awareness, and we imagine that we are matter, namely the material body. At 339, let's see what Krishna says at 339. At 339, the Lord says, Kaunteya, this perennial foe in the form of lust, this unquenchable fire covers the knower's knowledge. So when you're conditioned by lust, that lust covers your knowledge. That lust covers your knowledge. However, when we devotedly offer our actions to the Supreme, we uncover real knowledge that we are eternal parts of God. Like fallen sparks placed back in fire, we then blaze with pure knowledge and joy. So we'll end with this verse, 15:7, really important verse, because it's where Krishna is describing who we are in this world. In the living world, the eternal living being, that's you, that's me, we're eternal living beings. Part of me alone, Krishna uses the word amsha, which Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, translated as part and parcel. So in the living world, the living being, the eternal living being, part of me presides over matter-based senses, whose sixth is the mind. So we're in this body, and we have these senses, of which The mind is one. And here's a little footnote. Let's read what this footnote says. It's probably interested. Senses, whose sixth is mind. Mind is considered to be a sixth sense that coordinates the other five. Good point. This master, this master, that means the soul. So let's go back to and conclude with Dr. Resnick, what Dr. Resnick says on this point. So, like fallen sparks placed back in fire, we then blaze with pure knowledge and joy. As we have seen, the Gita emphasizes that one should offer to God, not to the gods, okay? After all, we are eternally part of Krishna. Same verse, 15:7. We are parts and parcels. This word I mentioned, amsa, parts and parcels, or part of him alone. Thus, it is natural to serve God, as much as the hand naturally serves the body of which it is part. By feeding the body, the hand nourishes itself. And we'll close with this. Here he's referring to a verse from the second canto, etc. Whereas there's an analogy given. I memorized this verse on the campus of Stanford University in my mid-20s or early 20s when I was doing some proselytizing on that campus. And a friend of mine who was also doing some outreach work at the same time, during our little break, he recited this verse to me. He had just learned it, and I was like, wow, I want to learn this verse too. So I memorized a little bit. I still remember, of course, the meaning, the Sanskrit. I'm a little rusty on it. But the point is, here's the analogy. Just as pouring water on a root of the tree gives nourishment to the entire tree, all the branches of the tree, similarly, by feeding the stomach, you give food to all the arms, the limbs of the body. So by focusing on our source, and what is the source? Since we're parts and parcels of Krishna, Krishna says, you are my part and parcel. So if we focus our consciousness, our love, our propensity to love, our decisions to serve and to love back to Krishna, back to our source, then we become fulfilled. We become as he is, namely, and how we are, ontologically, we just disconnected ourselves from that, namely, full of happiness, full of knowledge, and eternal. That's our true nature. So next time we'll continue reading, and we'll go, with this point of sacrifices in bhakti, in devotion to Krishna. Krishna refers to himself as the enjoyer, and so on. We'll see some beautiful verses. Bhagavad Gita thus teaches that only an offering to the Supreme Lord keeps one on the highest spiritual plane. So we'll start there next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being here, and keep moving forward in your God consciousness, in your Krishna consciousness. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and all glories to the Supreme Lord Krishna. Thank you.